So today we're continuing our Kings and Prophets series of the Bible, and we're going to be speaking today about Jeroboam. You all see me give the constant reminder of how Israel back then was split up into two different kingdoms, one to the north, which was known as the Kingdom of Israel, and one to the south, which was the Kingdom of Judah. Well, today we're going to be answering such questions as how did Israel become two kingdoms? Number two, why was the northern kingdom, the one that Jeroboam, the one that we're going to be focusing on today, why was the northern kingdom so idolatrous? If you all recall what Jesus told the Samaritan woman at the well, he says, Jesus saith unto her, Woman, believe me, the hour cometh, when ye shall neither in this mountain nor yet at Jerusalem worship the Father. Ye worship ye know not what. He's speaking of the Samaritans. Ye worship ye know not what. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. Now, why is Christ making such a distinction here between worshiping at the mountain in Samaria and at the temple in Jerusalem? But the hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshippers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for the Father seeketh such to worship him. And see, this brings up a very good subject because today it's very strange for us to think of people worshiping idols because since the time of Christ has what he told the woman that everyone shall worship in spirit and truth and whom worship the Father, praying in Walmart, praying in wherever. You can just go anywhere now and just pray unto God. You don't have to really seek out a certain place. You don't have to aim at a certain direction or any of that. No, you can just pray to him in spirit and in truth, which is why it is now so strange to us that people would have to have an idol to worship or something along those lines. Well, we're going to be dealing with that subject today. Now, before we begin speaking on King Jeroboam, the first king of the northern kingdom of Israel, we must back up a little bit to the time of King Solomon. And just as the Bible tells us how Solomon, David's son Solomon, he had 700 wives and 300 concubines. Now, there are many different reasons why Solomon felt the need to have so many women. And one of the reasons was political. He could make more allies, and we know that the whole world admired him and loved him, and that his reign for the most part was a time of peace. But it also signified how much wealth that a man had, that he could take care of such a large family. We read in 1 Kings 11:4, For it came to pass, when Solomon was old, that his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not perfect with the Lord his God, as was the heart of his father David. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Zidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. Then did Solomon build a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, in the hill that is before Jerusalem, and for Moloch, the abomination of the children of Ammon. And likewise did he for all his strange wives, which burnt incense and sacrificed unto their gods. Wherefore the Lord said unto Solomon, Forasmuch as this is done of thee, and thou hast not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I have commanded thee, I will surely rend the kingdom from thee, and will give it to thy servant. Speaking of Jeroboam. Notwithstanding, in thy days I will not do it for David thy father's sake, but I will rend it out of the hand of thy son, Rehoboam. Howbeit I will not rend away all the kingdom, but will give one tribe to thy son for David my servant's sake, and for Jerusalem's sake, which I have chosen. Once again, Solomon, he had every advantage. David, his father, pretty much laid out the entire blueprint for the temple, in which would be known now as Solomon's temple, to be built, in which Solomon did have that built very early on. And while Solomon was with the Lord, it was a time of peace. Even Solomon's very name signifies peace. But whenever he began to fall away from God, then the Lord brought up, we're told about 3 different enemies. And the only one that's a fellow Israelite is the last one mentioned, and that is Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, an Ephrathite of Zeredah, Solomon's servant, whose mother's name was Zeruiah, a widow woman. Even he lifted up his hand against the king. And this was the cause that he lifted up his hand against the king. Solomon built Millo and repaired the breaches of the city of David his father. The city of David, the oldest part of Jerusalem, sits on a 12-acre spur that extends south of the Temple Mount. It is here that David built his palace, the large stone structure supported by the millow, the stepped stone structure, extending down the slope. You see, Solomon, like other kings, he really took an interest in building eventually, and so he had so much that he wanted to build, and in order to build and make your kingdom look so great, what does it take? Money. So it is believed that taxes were raised as well as heavy labor placed upon the men. Pulpit commented, as this millow was built about the 25th year of Solomon's reign, according to chapter 9, we are enabled to fix approximately the date of Jeroboam's rebellion. It was apparently about 10 or 12 years before Solomon's death. Scripture then goes on to tell us, and the man Jeroboam was a mighty man of valor. And Solomon, seeing the young man that he was industrious, he made him ruler over all the charge of the house of Joseph. Now the house of Joseph would have included Manasseh and Ephraim. And so large and powerful was this tribe of Ephraim that the northern kingdom of Israel is often referred to just as Ephraim by the prophets and others. Jameson Foster Brown commented about Jeroboam, this was an internal enemy of a still more formidable character. He was a young man of talent and energy who, having been appointed by Solomon superintendent of the engineering works projected around Jerusalem, had risen into public notice. And on being informed by a very significant act of the prophet Ahijah, which we're about to learn about, upon hearing from this prophet of the royal destiny that was to be his mind took a new turn. Verse 29, and it came to pass at that time, when Jeroboam went out of Jerusalem, that the prophet Ahijah the Shilonite found him in the way, and he had clad himself with a new garment, and they two were alone in the field.
Ah, Jeroboam, come, eat. Some say I'm a prophet.
And are you?
Perhaps. I have a message for you. Have you a knife? These 12 pieces of my cloak represent the 12 tribes of Israel. Solomon has broken his laws and worshipped false gods. He will take the kingdom away from Solomon's son, Rehoboam. Give it to you. He will give the tribe of Judah to Rehoboam, so that his servant David will always have a lamp before him in Jerusalem.
So the prophet delivers this message, and then he tells him, and remember Ahijah, because he's going to come up later in Jeroboam's life, whenever they're both sort of in older age. We'll come to that. But he also tells him this, and it's almost the same type of promise that God gave unto David that he gives unto Jeroboam. And it shall be, if thou wilt hearken unto all that I command thee, and wilt walk in my ways, and do what is right in my sight, to keep my statutes and my commandments, as David my servant did, that I will be with thee, and build thee a sure house, as I built for David, and will give Israel unto thee. The old Bible commentary from Pulpit noted on this promise. Observe, however, there was no promise to Jeroboam, as there was to David, of an enduring kingdom. It was not God's design to take away the kingdom from David in perpetuity, as the Messiah was to be born of and ultimately reign from where? The seat of David. But until the time of the Messiah's reign, Jeroboam's lineage could have had power over the 10 tribes of the north. It's then that word of this prophecy reaches the ears of King Solomon, and then we read in verse 40, Solomon sought therefore to kill Jeroboam, and Jeroboam arose and fled into Egypt, into Shishak, king of Egypt, and was in Egypt until the death of Solomon. And Solomon's actions there really show us how far a backslider can drift away from God. Solomon was the very man in whom wrote, there are many devices in a man's heart, nevertheless the counsel of the Lord, that shall stand. Now fast forward ahead about a decade or so later, Solomon has died, and his son Rehoboam, we read in 1 Kings 12, and Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel were come to Shechem to make him king.
I've come to be anointed as your king. Have you lost your tongues?
Your father broke God's holy law, and his punishment has fallen on his people. They groaned under Solomon's taxes. They want your word. There will be no more forced labor, and the taxes will be fair. Yes. Otherwise, they refuse to become your subject.
You thought my father's yoke was heavy? You thought my father's taxes too high? Mine will crush you. My father chastised you with whips. I shall use scorpions. This finger is thicker than my father's thigh.
That is your final word.
I have nothing more to say.
You have heard your king. Will you serve him?
So 10 tribes, all except Judah and Benjamin, they all migrate north. And here we have the very beginning of the two kingdoms. Then King Rehoboam sent Adoram, who was over the tribute, and all Israel stoned him with stones that he died. Therefore King Rehoboam made speed to get him up to his chariot to flee to Jerusalem. It's then that Rehoboam assembles an army of 180,000 soldiers to restore the kingdom, until the prophet Shemaiah forbids them to fight against their brethren, in which they do agree that the Lord does not want this. And so suddenly, after 120 years, because Saul reigned 40 years, David reigned 40 years, and Solomon reigned 40 years, after 120 years of all of Israel being united under one king, suddenly they're now divided. And Jeroboam, of course, is installed as the new king over the northern kingdom. 1 Kings 12:25. Then Jeroboam built Shechem and Mount Ephraim, and dwelt therein, and went out from thence and built Peniel. Now, the reason why this is being noted is because remember how Jeroboam was industrious. He knew how to build up and to fortify settlements. Well, Shechem was going to be the first of the capitals. It would eventually become Samaria. But notice how Peniel is on the east of the Jordan. This was to keep out other invading places. So he's building up his kingdom. But suddenly, after so many months, one of the feast days come up in Jerusalem, where all the people are to go to Jerusalem and to celebrate one of these feasts. And Jeroboam said in his heart at that time, Now shall the kingdom return to the house of David. If this people go up to do sacrifice in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, Solomon's temple, then shall the heart of this people turn again unto their Lord, even unto Rehoboam, king of Judah, and they shall kill me, and go again to Rehoboam, king of Judah. So Jeroboam, it's not just that he's power hungry, he is fearing for his life, because the way that they would do it in the East is, if a people desired to be reunited with their former rulers, they would cut off the head of their current ruler, the usurper, and bring the head to their former king. So it's out of fear for his life that we continue to read in verse 28 this about Jeroboam and his awful sin that persists in Israel. Whereupon the king took counsel, and made 2 calves of gold, and said unto them, It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Behold thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. And he set the one in Bethel, and the other put he in Dan. Now notice the locations. One is in the south, and one is in the far north. This covers the whole landscape so that all the people can come to worship these golden calves. There's a few very important notes from Bible commentators on these 2 calves. In these verses is recorded the adoption of the fatal policy which has caused Jeroboam to be handed down in the sacred record as the son of Nebat who made Israel to sin. After this, even after Jeroboam's life, all the kings that come after him do not remove these golden calves. No matter what, they can set up Baal worship at the time of Jezebel and then take that down, and then they start up Moloch worship and then they take that down, but these 2 calves remain, these idols. The worship at Dan and Bethel was not the bloody and sensual worship of false gods, but the worship of the Lord Jehovah as they believed in their hearts, because notice he says, This is the God that brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And they all know that it was the Lord God that brought them out of the land of Egypt, but under the form of a visible emblem meant to be a substitute for the ark and the overshadowing cherubim. Matthew Henry also commented the people might be less shocked at worshiping the God of Israel under an image than if they had at once been asked to worship Baal, and whom they knew was a demon. But it made way for that kind of idolatry, them worshiping this calf. But why calves? Well, number one, remember at Mount Sinai, how Aaron, they had him build the calf, and Moses had them to destroy it. And they said the very same thing about that golden calf. They said, This is the God that brought us up out of the land of Egypt. Calf worship was common in Egypt. And where did Jeroboam just spend over a decade at fleeing from Solomon in Egypt, and he has just now returned from there. Number two, a possible reason is that the bull is thought to be the emblem of Ephraim, in whom Jeroboam has got such clout with by this time. Number three, and this is the one that I believe the most, the reason why these are golden calves representing and what they thought was the God of heaven. Number three, the two cherubim in Solomon's temple may have inspired the golden calves. Right here's a pretty decent depiction, I believe, of what they believe the cherubim may have looked like within Solomon's temple. And the cherubim are described in the book of Ezekiel as to what they look like. And one of their faces, of the four faces that they have, is that of a bull or an ox. And there were other bull emblems to be seen within Solomon's temple that the people would have recognized, namely that of the brazen or molten sea, which was used for ritual washing of the priest. And once again, I believe that this goes all the way back to what Jesus told the Samaritan woman at the well, about 1,000 years after the time period in which we're speaking. Ye worship you know not what. Speaking about these old Israelites. Ye worship you know not what. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews, because they always thought that they worshiped the true God in Samaria. But they had these idols, these two calves, and they didn't really know the true God. Verse 30, and this thing became a sin, for the people went to worship before the one, even unto Dan, and he made a house of high places. Jeroboam made a house of high places, and made priests of the lowest of the people, which were not of the sons of Levi. Remember how God, he said, only Levites can be priests. Well, Jeroboam, he made whoever wanted to be a priest. And the thought is, according to some of the commentators, is that because they now have a new king with Jeroboam, let's have new places of worship. And so there's all types of reasons that Jeroboam probably gave them in order to justify worshiping in front of these idols, obvious idols. But if he fashioned them after the form of the cherubim within the Temple of Solomon, because think about it, there are two that he has, and we know that there are two large 15-foot tall cherubim that were located within the Holy of Holies. There were 4 cherubim altogether if you include the Ark of the Covenant, but he makes 2. And so he could have easily have said, these are like the cherubim within the temple. All types of different reasons in order to work. You know, Satan, he does this. It's then that we read in 1 Kings 13 about this. Now the worship has begun. They're having church services with this golden calf. And behold, there came a man of God out of Judah by the way of the Lord unto Bethel. This would have been to the golden calf in the southern part of Israel. And Jeroboam stood by the altar to burn incense. And the prophet cried against the altar in the word of the Lord, and said, O altar, altar, thus saith the Lord, behold, a child shall be born unto the house of David, Josiah by name, and upon thee shall he offer the priests of the high places that burn incense upon thee, and men's bones shall be burnt upon thee. Now Josiah, king of Judah, he would come many years later, and he would destroy these things. And he gave a sign the same day, saying, This is the sign which the Lord hath spoken. Behold, the altar shall be rent, and the ashes that are upon it shall be poured out. And it came to pass, when King Jeroboam heard the saying of the man of God, which had cried against the altar in Bethel, that he put forth his hand from the altar, saying, Lay hold on him. And his hand, which he put forth against him, dried up, so that he could not pull it in again to himself. The altar also was rent, and the ashes poured out from the altar, according to the sign which the man of God had given by the word of the Lord. And the king answered and said unto the man of God, Entreat now the face of the Lord thy God. Notice the separation. It's no longer the Lord my God. It's like a sudden realization strikes Jeroboam. He says, Entreat of the Lord thy God, and pray for me, that my hand may be restored me again. And the man of God besought the Lord, and the king's hand was restored him again, and became as it was before. And the king said unto the man of God, Come home with me, and refresh thyself, and I will give thee a reward. And the man of God said unto the king, If thou wilt give me half thine house, or half the kingdom, in other words, I will not go in with thee, neither will I eat bread nor drink water in this place. For so it was charged me by the word of the Lord, saying, Eat no bread, nor drink water, nor turn again by the same way that thou came into this place. I believe the reason for this was because the Lord says, don't be tainted by Israel. And later on, at the time of Christ, the Pharisees, we know, if they even touched dirt from the land of the Samaritans, they would immediately wipe that dirt off of them because they viewed them as so unclean. They wouldn't even walk upon their land. So he went another way and returned by the way that he came to Bethel. Now there's a lot more that happens to this prophet afterwards, and it actually cost him his life. So if you desire to read about that, I'm going to skip it because we're focusing on Jeroboam, but the narrative continues in 1 Kings 13. After this thing, Jeroboam returned not from his evil way, but made again of the lowest of the people priests of the high places. Whosoever would, he consecrated him, and he became one of the priests of the high places. And this thing became sin unto the house of Jeroboam, even to cut it off and to destroy it from off the face of the earth. It's then that we read in chapter 14 about the son of Jeroboam, Abijah, falling ill. And Jeroboam said to his wife, Arise, I pray thee, and disguise thyself, that thou be not known to be the wife of Jeroboam, and get thee to Shiloh, not far from Bethel, and get thee to Shiloh. Behold, there is Ahijah the prophet, which told me that I should be king over this people. So here we see Jeroboam seeking out the only prophet that he knows to be a true prophet of the Lord, instead of seeking out his priests that he set up, and instead of going to pray into these golden calves, as he is so accustomed to doing. Apparently that's not working, so he seeks out the only man of God that he knows may actually have anything to do with him by this point. And Jeroboam's wife did so, and arose, and went to Shiloh, and came to the house of Ahijah. But Ahijah could not see, for his eyes were set by reason of his age. Now remember, she's disguising herself. And the Lord said unto Ahijah, Behold, the wife of Jeroboam cometh to ask a thing of thee for her son, for he is sick. Thus and thus shalt thou say unto her, for it shall be, when she cometh in, that she shall feign herself to be another woman. And it was so, when Ahijah heard the sound of her feet as she came in at the door, that he said, Come in, thou wife of Jeroboam, why feignest thou thyself to be another? For I am sent to thee with heavy tidings. It's then that the prophet gives an entirely different message from what he had delivered unto Jeroboam many years before. And he gives this one to his wife. Jeroboam is too ashamed to even show his face to the prophet by this point. And he tells her, because of your husband's evil ways up until this point, not only shall the kingdom be rent from him now, but his family shall be destroyed. Arise thou therefore, get thee to thine own house, and when thy feet enter into the city, the child shall die. It's important to note at this point that child in the Bible can mean even up until 20 years of age, because Solomon, whenever he's 20 years old, King Solomon, whenever he first becomes king at 20, he refers to himself as a little child. So her son is likely a young man, 20, early 20s or so, because of what we read next. And all Israel shall mourn for him and bury him, for he only of Jeroboam shall come to the grave, because in him there is found some good thing toward the Lord God of Israel in the house of Jeroboam. So this boy had lived long enough to please the Lord in some way. Moreover, the Lord shall raise him up a king over Israel, who shall cut off the house of Jeroboam that day. But what? Even now. And he shall give Israel up because of the sins of Jeroboam, who did sin, and who made Israel to sin. So it's this initial act of placing these golden calves up that is the eventual downfall of the nation itself. And Jeroboam's wife arose and departed, and came to Tirzah, and when she came to the threshold of the door, the child died. And the days which Jeroboam reigned were 22 years, and he slept with his fathers, and Nadab his son reigned in his stead. So Jeroboam dies, and his son Nadab takes over. And there was war between Rehoboam and Jeroboam all the days of his life. And Nadab the son of Jeroboam began to reign over Israel in the 2nd year of Asa king of Judah, and reigned over Israel only 2 years. Well, what happened to him? And Baasha the son of Ahijah, not the prophet, another man, of the house of Issachar, conspired against him, and Baasha smote him at Gibbethon, which belonged to the Philistines, for Nadab and all Israel laid siege to Gibbethon. And it came to pass, when Baasha reigned, that he smote all the house of Jeroboam. He left not to Jeroboam any that breathed, until he had destroyed him, according unto the saying of the Lord, which he spake by his servant Ahijah the Shilonite.